CFATF assessor for Guyana, and he has kindly acquiesced to the request to have some comments and have an interchange with the media here for a few minutes before he goes to his next engagement. And so we'll hand him over to you, and we expect you to ask the questions, the burning questions you've been.
Can you say what the outcome of the meeting tonight was?
I don't think that's my role to tell you exactly what the outcome is, because my understanding is that the deliberations of the select committee are confidential.
In terms of what was put to you, what was queried?
Excuse me?
Your role in clarifying the query?
Yeah, my role was to clarify the status of Guyana vis-a-vis the CFATF and the level of compliance with the international AMLCFT recommendations.
Mr. Hernandez, can you say whether the proposed amendments, as they have been tabled so far in the House, are they acceptable by CFATF, FATF standards?
What I can say is that some of the amendments were subject to the review of the CFATF, and a response was sent to the appropriate authorities with regards to their compliance with international standards.
Are they compliant as proposed now in the House?
As proposed now in the, well, as I said,
yes,
yeah,
the bill.
Yeah, it's the bill itself, right, and not any additional amendments. The bill, as it is preferring right now, as the amendments right now are compliant with the recommendations that were made concerning Guyana's meeting the AMLCFT standards.
And what about the proposed amendments by the Partnership for National Unity to the Principal Act?
I cannot make a comment on that at this point in time.
But I think that's where the burning question lies for us here, because we're here as journalists caught in a situation as to whether indeed what we're hearing, not in any way to offend the members of the government here, but we hear wondering whether they're telling us the truth, whether the opposition is telling us the truth. So we're expecting at least an independent view from you about whether those amendments are acceptable or not in keeping with CFATF standards.
No. What I can say is that the CFATF policy is to maintain its independence with regards to the legislative process of any one of its members, right? We can make a comment or a suggestion with regards to when the legislation is finalized, because we don't know what sort of changes occurs during the legislative process. We can comment on draft bills that are submitted to us on the understanding that that is not the final word of the CFATF, because draft bills are subject to change, right? So at this point in time, I cannot make a comment with regards to those amendments. As I said, it will have to be after the final piece of legislation is passed.
What drop dead date do we have to pass this legislation or pay sanctions?
The process, as I outlined in the select committee, Guyana has to submit a report to the CFATF on its follow-up process by February the 28th. Now, in order for the bill to be considered by the CFATF plenary, the bill has to be passed and enforced by the 28th of February and submitted with the report to the CFATF. The reason this is necessary is that the CFATF has to analyze the bill for compliance, and a report made to the plenary in this May, as to what sort of level of compliance the bill has with the international standards. On the basis of that report, the plenary will then be able to make a decision going forward with Guyana, whether Guyana should be subject to further countermeasures, or whether Guyana should be sent or should be recommended to the FATF for what is known as the ICRG review. And that is the reason for the February 28th deadline, right? And let it be known also that Guyana is not the only country required to submit information on their follow-up process on February the 28th. This is a recommendation for all CFATF member countries that are within the follow-up process. Everybody has to report by February the 28th.
So if you don't pass legislation, what will happen to the country? Or what can happen?
If we don't pass legislation, in May, the CFATF will decide to effectively nominate Guyana for the FATF ICRG review. The FATF is due to meet in June 2014, and they are there at that plenary meeting. They will then make a decision as to whether Guyana should be subject to what is known as a prima facie review by the International Cooperation Review Group. If Guyana does not pass the legislation in time, the CFATF plenary would make a recommendation to the FATF that Guyana be placed within that review process.
And that can lead to what? Blacklisting?
That can lead, there are 3 levels of listing by the FATF, right, coming out of the ICRG review. The most severe level, which is the top tier, effectively requires countries to issue what are known as countermeasures against countries on that list. At present, only 2 countries are on that list, North Korea and Iran. After that list, there is another layer underneath that list, and those are countries that have major AML, that have significant AMLCFT deficiencies, but that have not given a political commitment to deal with those issues, or have not formulated an action plan in collaboration with the FATF to deal with those outstanding issues. That is that level. The lowest tier are countries that have issued a political commitment to implement the reforms and have also formulated an action plan in collaboration with the FATF, which sets out deadlines for the implementation of those measures. That's the lowest listing. After a prima facie review, or after the ICRG review, Guyana can find itself on any one of these levels. Most likely, if it does not issue a political commitment, and if it does not agree an action plan, it will be listed on the 2nd level. If, however, it does during the period of review, because during the period of review the FATF will contact the authorities in Guyana to ascertain or to get additional information and to try to ascertain what are the areas of deficiencies. If after that review Guyana during that process does offer a letter of commitment and comes to an agreement with the FATF about an action plan, Guyana will be listed at the lowest level, which is tier 3, right? Once you're listed, effectively what this means is that the FATF is telling the world that these countries have serious AML deficiencies and that countries should take appropriate measures to deal with the risks emanating from Guyana because of these particular AMLCFT deficiencies. So that could mean that countries, individual countries, will require their financial institutions to implement appropriate measures ranging from severe or more stricter requirements for the opening of accounts with their financial institutions, for transactions of accounts, for correspondent banking relationships. It could also result in access to international financing, financial markets being made more difficult because of these additional requirements. And also international developmental agencies will also take notes, which could also affect access to development funding and technical assistance.
So, at this stage, is Guyana blacklisted at all?
Guyana is on the CFATF list.
Blacklist?
Yes. Well, we won't call it a blacklist, right? I'll tell you exactly what list it's on. If you go to the CFATF website, you will see a public statement issued concerning Guyana and Belize. And effectively what that statement says, it identifies certain AML-CFT deficiencies in the country's regime, and it requests its members, CFATF member countries, to implement countermeasures against Guyana to deal with those particular deficiencies or the risk arising from those deficiencies. As I said, you just have to go to the website. You will see this public statement and it will identify the areas that Guyana are deficient in, and it will ask, and it particularly asks its members, the CFATF member countries, which are Caribbean regional member countries. There are about 29 of them. It includes not only the English-speaking Caribbean, but also some Spanish-speaking members around the Caribbean basin, and also the Dutch Caribbean is also included, and Haiti is also part of it. It effectively requests or effectively tells its members that they should implement countermeasures against doing business or transactions arising from Guyana. That's the list that Guyana is on right now. Belize is also on that list. And what I know for sure is that some of the supervisory authorities in the Caribbean have gone so far as to implement what we call directives, where they have advised their financial institutions to implement appropriate measures to deal with the risks coming from Guyana.
How do you, the emphasis here for the last year or so appears to be a lot on the passage of the bill. Now, how do you deal with aspect of enforcement? What role CFATF can play to ensure that the legislation is enforced?
Once the legislation has been put in place, there will be assessment of implementation. Guyana will have to report on the assessment of implementation before it can come off the list. So it's not just a matter of passing the legislation. Guyana will also have to demonstrate implementation before they can be taken off the list. And that could take, yeah, the regional list. So that could take anywhere from 18 months, 2 years, or even longer.
Mr. Hernandez, if I may, for the benefit of the press, because as a subject minister, I am being asked these questions repeatedly. You spoke in the committee, you expressed a view on the amendments which were sent to you as proposed by the APNU. It would help it would help me tremendously, and help the government, of course, and put a lot of perspective into the debate which is going on. If you can repeat for the benefit of the press the opinion which you expressed in relation to those amendments to the committee, I'd be most grateful if you can do that.
My concern with that is that the CFATF, as I said, cannot get involved directly in the legislative process. I was able to make known not so much my opinion, but observations with regards to certain concerns arising out of some of these amendments.
Well, those are the concerns I would like you to just explain.
Right.
To us,
All I pointed out was that there are two perils going forward with amendments put forward. One of them, A, some of the amendments that have been put forward deal with previous areas of the Act that were deemed compliant. The concern that we have is that the amendments being put forward may make those areas that were formerly compliant non-compliant. There is a risk with that. Additionally, there were some amendments that are outside the remit of the recommendations. In other words, they deal with measures that are not mentioned in the recommendations. We have no opinion on those things because we only deal specifically with the recommendations. It's up to the government, it's up to the legislative to decide about those particular measures, right? Our only concern, we made a comment about some of those recommendations with regards to the effectiveness, whether they will be able to be implemented and how it might affect the whole system. Those were our concerns raised with regards at the select committee on some of the particular amendments. I will not go into details as to which specific recommendations because, as I said, we want to remain. We are independent of the process. These are just considerations. They do not mean that, from the point of view of the recommendations, we recommend that they be put in place or they not be put in place. We just made observations as to some of the circumstances or some of the conditions that should be looked at in going forward and considering these amendments. That's all we have to say.
So there's a major risk going forward if those amendments were to be taken on board as far as getting off the list, getting be compliant.
What you mean, if they will be fully compliant?
No, if the amendments were to be passed, as proposed by the opposition, there is a greater risk going forward of taking longer to get off the list and being compliant.
I wouldn't say something like that right now. What I can say is, I said, I don't know what will happen going forward with the amendments as to whether any changes will be made. What I can say, as I said, is that we can offer comments as to the dangers or the concerns that could arise with those particular amendments, right? It is something for the parties concerned to consider. It has been presented to them, and it's up to them to make their decision going forward as to how they want to proceed, right? Once it has been passed, we will look at it, right? And we will analyze it, and at that point in time, we will then make a decision as to whether they fully comply or not. And as I said, as I pointed out, some of the areas that were formerly compliant may become non-compliant as a result of some of those amendments. The problem that we would have going forward with some of these things is that our process only focuses on those areas that were non-compliant. We do not focus on areas that are formally compliant, right? We raise this concern because Guyana will be subject to a mutual evaluation for the 4th round, and we are very concerned. We would like the country to be fully compliant across the board in all those recommendations. So we would not like to have a recommendation that was previously compliant, then resulting in it becoming non-compliant in the future, later on in the future. That's our main concern going forward, right?
How do you rate Guyana's performance under the existing legislation as far as fighting money laundering is concerned?
You can assess that fighting money laundering.
Well, I mean, enforcing the law against money laundering.
Enforcing the law against money laundering.
How do you rate the country's enforcement of the existing legislation?
All I can point you to is the follow-up report, the last follow-up report of Guyana, which is on our website, which was done in November. That gives you an idea of the level of compliance of Guyana at that point in time with regards to the measures that were put in place. And it gives a final conclusion as to what Guyana's level of compliance is.
Okay, thank you very much,
Mhm.
Mr. Chris. Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. Is there anything else you'd like to say? I think almost an hour later. So